and I advocate for a balanced, comprehensive approach to tax-free retirement. There isn't any one solution that provides all the answers. Really, I've built my worldview around the idea that I believe that tax rates in the near future are likely to be dramatically higher than they are today. I think that more and more experts are coming over into our camp. Tom, I think I've listened to you talk along those lines as well, that given the fiscal trajectory of our nation, given the $239 trillion of unfunded obligations, that taxes have nowhere to go but up. And the lion's share of cumulative retirement savings across the country, balances across the nation, 35 trillion or so that are stuck in tax-deferred vehicles like 401ks and IRAs. I think that Americans have gone into a business partnership with the IRS, and every year the IRS gets to vote on what percentage of their profits that they get to keep. And I think that's a dangerous partnership to be in. You could have $1 million in your IRA, but unless you can accurately predict what tax rates are going to be in the year you take that money out, you don't really know how much money you have. And that can, it's pretty hard to plan for retirement when you don't know how much money you have. So really the general thrust of what I talk about is this idea of sort of shielding your assets from the impact of higher taxes. And I advocate for a balanced, comprehensive approach to tax-free retirement. There isn't any one solution that provides all the answers. I'm a real big fan of Roth IRAs. I love Roth IRAs. I love Roth 401ks. I love Roth conversions. I love being able to take money out of your IRAs up to your standard deduction so that those distributions are also tax-free. And, you know, if you can keep your provisional income low enough, then your Social Security is tax-free as well. And then we talk about the idea of the life insurance retirement plan in chapter 5 of my book, The Power of Zero. And I'm remain fairly agnostic as to what kind of cash value life insurance that is. I prefer index universal life. I don't think I'd be here having this conversation with you if I were the same brand as Tom here. But I like IUL because I think IUL can do some specific things, can perform some specific applications that none of those other streams of income can do. And so, in stark contrast to a lot of what you might see on TikTok or elsewhere, I think that the IUL is an imperfect solution. It's not a silver bullet. It's not a panacea. It only works when utilized in concert with all those other streams of tax-free income. And you know, in our group, we do workshops all across the country and universities. Folks that are 50 to 67 generally come into our classroom, and I'll tell you what, the thing that is most weighing on their mind is long-term care. And so I would say 70% of our clients that end up using IUL are using it because they get a death benefit in advance of their death for the purpose of paying for long-term care. People aren't opposed to having long-term care, they're just opposed to paying for it. If you can give them a solution where they're not paying for 30 years, dying peaceful in their sleep, never having used it, and then it goes to pay for someone else's long-term care. In this instance, if they do die peacefully in their sleep 30 years from now, never having needed long-term care, someone's still getting a death benefit, probably your kids or your grandkids, so there isn't that sensation of having paid for something you hope you never have to use. So that's probably about 70% of the applications is, and then I guess the other one is sort of a super Roth type vehicle where you're, instead of continuing to pound money into a taxable brokerage account, where let's assume for a moment that you could net 6% in your IUL. I know there's lots of discussion as to whether you can do that or not. We can certainly talk about that. Let's assume you could get 6% net of fees over time. What would you have to get in your taxable brokerage account to be able to eclipse that? Well, if the higher your marginal tax rate is, the harder that is to eclipse. And so we're talking 9.5, 10% to be able to net 6% once you figure out the tax at your marginal rate. And so really it becomes an alternative. If you can get a 6% net rate of return without taking any more risk than what you're accustomed to taking in your savings account, that's a pretty safe and productive great way to grow at least a portion of your assets. And then The third application that we really look at a lot, and I talk about this in my book, my recent book, The Guru Gap, I talk about it quite a bit, is this whole idea of a volatility buffer. And I know that whole life has been used historically as a volatility buffer. I think it works really well in that situation. But this whole idea that if you can save 3 to 5 years worth of living expenses in your cash value life insurance, by day one of retirement, and then in the year following a down year in the market, you live out of that cash value. What that does is it gives your stock market portfolio a chance to recover before you take further distributions. And that act alone could increase your sustainable withdrawal rate on your stock portfolio to as high as 8% with a 95% confidence that your money will last through life expectancy. And so again, sort of in summary, I like IUL, but I'm not in love with IUL. I think IUL serves a purpose. It's a tool that accomplishes a specific objective. It only really works when used in concert with all those other streams of tax-free income we talked about. I think every stream of tax-free income I talked about does something unique that the other ones don't do. For example, a Roth IRA gives you immediate liquidity. None of those other ones really do that. A Roth 401k gives you a match. None of those other ones really do that. A Roth conversion allows you to convert an unlimited amount of assets to tax-free. None of those others can really do that. Taking money out of your IRA up to your standard deduction allows you to get a deduction on the front end, grow your money tax deferred, and take your money out tax free. To me, that's the holy grail of financial planning. And then finally, the IUL is almost an afterthought in all of this, but it, for most of our clients, it allows them to get a death benefit in advance of their death for the purpose of paying for long-term care. So that's really, in a nutshell, my retirement planning worldview and sort of how IUL, I believe, fits into the discussion.
And David, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but if IUL over a long period of time can get a net 5 or 6%, and then you factor in taxes, the after-tax dollar equivalent, and then you factor in the value of a death benefit, and then you said if you factor in the value of a long-term care, either if it's a legit rider or an accelerated benefit like rider, now that's where you can say that's where you could potentially say this asset or this insurance contract is providing a 9 to 10% equivalent return to someone's portfolio. Am I putting words in your mouth, or am I articulating that summary?
No. So let's say you're in a 37% tax bracket. What rate of return would you have to get in your taxable brokerage account in the stock market to be able to realize a net after-tax amount of, say, 6%? And if you figure in the death benefit, then that's all that makes the IUL part of it look even better. But really what I'm doing is I'm comparing the straight cash value to the balance in your stock market portfolio. And so if you don't believe you can get 6, you only believe you can get 5, then that changes the numbers just a little bit. But again, you're not taking any more risk than what you're accustomed to taking in a savings account, stock market risk. So I think that it could be an interesting solution if that's what you're looking to do.
One of the things that I see, part of Tom's story, is he kind of went down the asking a lot of questions, never necessarily wanted to be an academic, but kind of got there. And then that's where it was like the epiphany for life insurance came in. For you, I see it as more of you're obsessed around the tax side. And hey, taxes, and your book is really clear. We talk about diversification asset wise, but there's not a ton of people talking about tax diversification when it comes to the silent partner that we're in, called the U.S. government. And so it almost sounds like, hey, you're product, I don't care, but what I do care, and where I am biased to, is I want my money not deferred for some known date at some known time at an unknown threshold, whoever knows who's in president. So did I articulate that well? And then the second thing is, do you, when it comes to asset allocation, not that I'm holding you to any of this, but do the people that work with you or that you speak to tend to put more than 20% of their assets? Because there's only so much you can do in a Roth and other things. Is it one of those things where it's instead of me putting it into a brokerage account or deferring, I end up maybe putting a little bit more than 20% into a life insurance policy? Again, I just want to get kind of a basis on how you use life insurance and how you think about that when it comes to retirement planning.
Yeah. So as far as your initial question goes, look, there's all these these tax-free nooks and crannies in the IRS tax code, and I'm just looking to take advantage of every one of them, right? So they all, like I said, they all do something a little bit different. And so they're there for a reason, and I think that a balanced, comprehensive approach to tax-free retirement capitalizes on all of those nooks and crannies. And so that's really what we're trying to do at the end of the day. So it's a very non-life insurance-centric approach to tax-free retirement. It's, like I said, the life insurance is almost an afterthought, and it accomplishes an objective that none of those other things can do. And so, we got to the point where people, there's some companies that will underwrite IUL for morbidity and not for mortality, or at least the chronic illness rider. So they'll get rated preferred or preferred plus, and they come back, they'll say, hey, approved preferred or preferred plus, but you did not qualify for the chronic illness rider, and they'll not accept the policy. That's how badly they want it for the purposes of paying for long-term care. This idea of use it or lose it just gives them heartburn. Nobody wants to pay for something they hope they never have to use. And so this whole idea that if you do die peacefully in your sleep 30 years from now, never having needed long-term care, then at least someone's still getting a death benefit, your kids or your grandkids. Although I've noticed that people don't like to give money to their kids, but if you say grandkids, then they're all over that. So you have to remind me of the second part of your question, Caleb.
It just comes down to the asset allocation between life insurance versus other things. I think, Tom, again, I'll let you respond to this after, but you said something about 20, maybe 30%, but you're not a fan of like putting a ton of money into life insurance. Whereas I assume, David, you're more you're totally comfortable if it's only 20 or 30%, but you maybe be more comfortable being like, yeah, after you maximize those other tax-free areas, life insurance, when set up and used properly, is maybe a better alternative than other places. Again, I don't want to put words in your mouth. I'm just trying to get an idea, and then what we'll do is we'll kind of have a dialogue back and forth on some of the things that we agree and maybe some of the things that we have differences in.
I'm very much in agreement with the Ernst & Young study that recently came out. I mean, they're advocating for 30% of your retirement savings going towards cash value life insurance. And so admittedly, we don't have a ton of clients or prospects who are in that younger generation, but if you were in that younger generation, whether it's whole life or IUL, that's the number that I would recommend. As far as our typical client who's over age 50, really, we're backing into it. We're saying, okay, what amount of money, when fully funded into an IUL, produces a death benefit for Mr. and Mrs. Jones, where they have between $400,000 and $500,000 of death benefit each, fully funded. So, I mean, that could be 5% of their overall net worth. It could be 20%. It could be 30%. But we're talking, for Mr. and Mrs. Jones, we're talking $35,000 per year, maybe over 7 or 8 years, something like that. And that could be a higher percentage for some people, but a much lower percentage for others, depending on what their liquid net worth is. So that's really how we back into it. It's generally for the long-term care.
Got it.
But we have that cash value that we're accumulating along the way that can do some really interesting
But just to be clear, like you wouldn't, knowing what you know about insurance, you wouldn't say, yeah, someone should have 80% of their retirement assets in different type of life insurance policies and use that as cash flow, even if it can be set up tax-free cash flow.
That would make me super uncomfortable.
Okay.